right, well, hey, good morning, everybody. So good to see you here this morning. Man, we as a church love kids and we love families, so that was a lot of fun. Appreciate those families so much. Happy Father's Day to all the fathers in the room. So glad that you're here. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
That's great. You guys are fully on committed. That's really good. I just want to say that up front. We really appreciate fathers. Listen, the role of a father has kind of been severely downplayed by a large portion of our society. But I want you to know that the role that you have as fathers is very important. It always has been, and it always will be. And so we're so excited for you guys. And look, men, the role you play as fathers goes a long way to the health and success of your marriage and the health and success of your family. You are doing important work as a father. And make hay as a father now. Let's do it. Let's do it to the best of our abilities. We need you guys. Now, as we reflect on Father's Day, I do want to say this, and I know that all of us come from different backgrounds and experiences. I just want to acknowledge that there may be those in the room for whom today is a difficult day. And maybe that's because you never knew your father growing up, or because you knew your father, but he was not a loving father. Or maybe he was a great father, but he's recently passed away. And I just want you to know that we see you this morning, but more importantly, God sees you this morning. And so we're glad you're here, even though it may be a difficult day for you to be in the room with us. Now, this morning, we are going to be looking, in the time that we have together, at the importance of fathers. And there's a couple different places in the Bible that actually talk about the importance of fathers and the role of fathers. One place in particular that we're going to go this morning is the book of Ephesians, chapter 6. And so if you have a Bible, turn there. That's great. There's also the Bible app that you can go to, and I'll have the verses on the screen behind me. So there's a bunch of different ways for you to be able to see this, but I want you to be able to see this passage. Now, before we get into the actual text, I want to give you just a little background here. Paul is the author here. He's writing to the churches of Ephesus. And in this letter, he's just finished talking about marriage and the role of a husband and a wife and how that interacts in chapter 5 at the end of chapter 5. But he's using that as a picture to show Jesus' love for his church. And now we see the transition happening in chapter 6, and Paul's going to continue on talking about the family, but he's actually going to talk to children in verses 1 to 3, and then he's going to talk to fathers in verse 4. And so that's where we're going to be. That's where we're going to spend our time together this morning. Here's how he starts out. He actually addresses children. So this is really good if you're a children or a child or a student in the room this morning. Paul's actually talking right to you. But guess what? We're all kind of children. So, we actually all are children. We just maybe grown, but right? So this all applies to us in different ways. Here's what Paul says, starting in verse 1, Ephesians chapter 6. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with a promise, so that it may go well with you and that you may enjoy long life on the earth. Fathers, do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord. So this section divides up neatly into two different parts. Verses 1 to 3, Paul talks to children, and then verse 4, Paul talks to fathers. And so the first thing that Paul says in verses 1 to 3 is, children, what you do matters. Children, what you do matters. If you're a child in the room this morning, you're a student in the room, what you do matters. It matters in the family. You are not just a person that's like, hey, I'm like a half of a person, and then when I grow up, I'll be a full person. That's not at all what Paul says, that you are important. He says, first of all, in verse 1, as a child, you need to obey your parents. Now, I just want to say, obedience, I don't know how you feel about that word, right? It's a little bit of a challenge at times. When I was a kid growing up, I was excited about obedience when I wanted to do it, and I was not excited about obedience when I did not want to do it, right? Maybe you feel a little bit of that in the room. But Paul says it's really important that we obey our parents, like a part of the function of our family, the part of the peace and the joy, the fun that we have as a family comes as we, as children, obey our parents. And then he continues on in verse 2. He has something else to say to children. Honor your father and your mother, which is the first commandment with a promise, so that it may go well with you and that you may enjoy long life on the earth. It's possible to obey your parents, but not honor them. You know that, right? You know what I'm talking about? Like when you were like, I think this was an old school expression, okay? So all the kids in the room, just know that this is way, you don't have to ever say this again, but you could say something like, I'm sitting down on the outside, but I'm standing up on the inside. That was like one of the things that we said as kids, like, when we were doing what our parents said to do, but we weren't happy about it, right? And so there's some sense in which we're like obeying, but we're not honoring in that moment. And so Paul says, obey and honor your parents. But then he says that this is the first commandment with a promise. Now that's actually really interesting. What does he mean by that? Well, he's drawing back to the Old Testament. So in the Old Testament, we have a list of the 10 commandments in the book of Exodus. And he's appealing all the way back to one of those commandments. And one of those commandments says, honor your father and your mother. And so it says that very specifically. And so Paul is actually pulling back to that. And there's two parts here specifically to this promise that we see in Ephesians 6. One of those parts is basically what we have back in Exodus regarding these commandments, is the idea that there will be long days in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. That's what Exodus says. And so here we see in Ephesians chapter 6 something similar with you will have a long life. But let's look at these two specific promises. First, he says that it will go well with you, and then he says you will have a long life. The idea of it will go well with you, basically this is the idea that honoring and obeying your parents is beneficial not just for your well-being, but for your relationships with your parents and family. Right? When I was a teenager, I thought I was way smarter than I was, right? You know how that works? I'm not going to say that everybody who is a teenager in the room here thinks that, okay? That may have just been me and a few other adults here who are smiling at me, right? But we thought that we were way smarter than we were. And so as a result of that, I would kind of look at my parents and their commands more as like suggestions. Like, I'm not really sure you know what's going on here, Mom and Dad. So like, I think maybe I'm just going to kind of pull a trump card and I'm going to do my own thing. And so I would do my own thing, and then I would realize how not intelligent I was. And my parents would just be smiling at me, right? That's the thing. And so Paul says that, look, honoring and obeying your parents is good for you, and it cultivates a healthy relationship between you and your parents. This will be good for you. Then the second promise is that you will have a long life. You will have a long life. Now, this is kind of one of those things that Proverbs reminds us of. This is like generally true. It doesn't mean that if you guaranteed you obey and honor your parents that you're going to live to your 90. That's not what's going on here. But it's a general truth. Now, this kind of comes out in a couple different ways. I remember when I was a teenager, again, my dad was teaching me how to mow the lawn. And that was, Lord knows that was so good. One of these, he had these 2 trees in the backyard that he had planted for shade in our house. We were in a brick house, and so in the summer, it got really hot. My sister's laughing right now. I'm not sure I'm going to get through the story. But so he had these 2 trees that he was desperately trying to get some shade in the house. He didn't believe in air conditioning. And so in the summer months in northeastern Pennsylvania, it would be really hot in the house. And so he's like, okay, we're going to do these shade trees, and then in a couple of years, we are going to have shade from the hot sun. And it was good in theory. But then he taught me how to mow the lawn. And so these 2 trees were about 20 feet apart from each other, and we had a riding lawnmower. And so what I would do, if like, let's say this is like the one tree and this is the other tree. What I would do is I'd pull the lawnmower in, I'd pull up here, stick that sucker in a reverse. It's the old International, I'm talking about the old school. And so I put that in reverse, and then, I would look back and try to go right up to here so that I could get the grass in between, right? Everybody's you tracking with me so far? Okay, so I did that. I pulled right up, and I'd done this several times before. I was a veteran of this. And so when I was riding lawnmower, I was, doing these things like as a kid. And I pulled right up, put that thing in reverse, and then I looked back because I wanted to make sure I didn't hit this, and I let off the clutch, and all of a sudden, it didn't go in reverse. It kept going forward. And here we have a tree, but somewhere between 6 and 8 feet in height, about that thick. And believe it or not, a riding lawnmower can cut right down to the 2 inches. and I went right over that tree. And I remember thinking, I ran over the tree, I looked back, and my dad, I was a skinny kid. I was always a skinny kid, and I was just really short at the time. And my dad goes 5'10", 220, 230. He's all muscle, all right? And I ran over that tree, and I thought, dear Lord, I am planning my own funeral. This is going to be bad. And so I ran inside. I remember this. I ran inside. I hid under my bed, and I locked the door. It was irrational, but it's the only thing I could think of at that time to do. All right. And so my dad taught me, that's not how he taught me to mow the lawn. And he was fine eventually. And about 3 months later, he let me mow the lawn again. But as he taught me how to mow the lawn, one of the things that he told me was, hey, Neal, when you mow the lawn, do not put your hand under the mower while it is going, right? And there's a reason for that, right? Because you will not be pleased at the results of the emergency room and all that kind of stuff that goes along with that. And so in one sense, this idea, the promise that the scripture says that this, to live long on the earth, if I obey my dad in that moment and don't put my hand under the lawnmower, guess what? I will live longer than if I try it the other way, right? But that's not what he's talking about. He's saying, look, when you honor and obey your parents, they help you navigate life in a way that will help you live life longer and more joyously and a godlier fashion than if you choose not to do that. Honor and obey your parents. This is what he calls us to as kids. So I think what Paul is trying to highlight here is this. Children, you have an important part to play in the family. What you do matters. You are a key part of the team. And one of the main roles that you get to do and do it well, honor and obey your parents. Now he shifts in verse 4. He goes from talking to children, now he talks to fathers. And here's what he says. Do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord. If you're newer to church as a father, it might surprise you what Paul actually says here and how practical and how significant your role as a father is in raising your children. Now, Paul gives the fathers a negative command, and then he turns and gives them two positive commands. The negative command in verse 4 is, do not exasperate your children. Now, exasperate's a big word. It's helpful in Scrabble, but it may not be helpful for you at this moment in trying to understand what we're getting at here. So exasperate simply means to not make angry. Now, what Paul's talking about here specifically is that there's a certain kind of harshness and excessiveness or unrealistic expectations that we can have as fathers that can be to the detriment of our kids. And we need to be careful, and Paul is warning us against that. Now, he says, I should probably say also what this is not, right? If you are a father and you've been a father for any length of time, you will know that kids are not always happy with you. Sometimes they get angry with you. And sometimes they get angry with you and you've actually done the right thing, right? Because kids are not always excited about accountability. And they're not always excited about confrontation. But you did the right thing. So Paul is not talking about, hey, well, if your kids are mad, that means somehow as a father you screwed up. No, that's not it. He's talking specifically about a harsh, heavy-handed way of doing something. He's talking specifically about unrealistic expectations that crush our children, that crush their drive, that crush their hopes, and all that goes along with it. No, he said that's what you cannot do as a father. This is not good for us as fathers. Now he turns around and he gives two positive commands at the end of verse 4. He says we are to bring our children up in the training and instruction of the Lord. Now, it might be surprising to you that Paul would specifically address fathers about raising children. Because there's a mentality that exists in our culture today that teaches that men don't really need to worry about raising their children. Men just go and make money. They drink beer, they watch sports, they play golf, they do all those things, but they don't really, the children are kind of like, that's not their area. But here's the deal. It's not the mom's job to raise the children while the dad is absent in the home without the kids. This is specifically stated to the fathers. I would even argue that in some Christian circles, this belief also exists. I'm just going to go out, I'm going to work hard, I'm going to do my own thing, and that the mom is responsible for the children. But that is not what the Bible says. And that's clear from what Paul says here. Paul tells you specifically as a father to bring up your kids in the training and instruction of the Lord. And while, yes, it is a partnership between you and your wife, you are still responsible. It is not something that you can check out and still be a follower of Jesus. Closely, at least. You're not following Jesus closely if you choose to check out in that moment. So I want to look at the two words here, training and instruction. The word training here has the idea of the act of providing guidance for responsible living. All right? The act of providing guidance for responsible living. So this kind of encompasses the spiritual, the emotional, the physical, all that goes along with this. So we could say things like, as a father, you should be helping your children, depending on where they are in life, with a bunch of different things. Things like reading the Bible. Help them understand the basics of reading the Bible. Help them how to understand how to pray. Help them how to study the Bible. Help them how to build friendships. Help them to navigate conflict in friendships. Help them to be able to navigate finances. Help them to be able to learn how to work hard and be on time. Soft skills, how to talk to adults. How to be a good friend. How to be a good worker. All these things are things that they can and should learn from you. And I just want to say a word of caution at this point too. Don't just assume that they know. They may not know. You need to tell them. You need to model that with your life. It's actions and words. But I want to talk specifically about one point that I think is super important. And fathers, while we're talking to you in Father's Day, I want to make sure that you hear this. One of the ways that we train our kids well is by setting a good example of running hard and fast after Jesus. All right, so just hear me when I say that. If you're like, well, I don't love where my kids are spiritually, where are you spiritually? Are you setting the example for your kids of what it looks like to run hard and fast after Jesus? Now, I'm not saying that you're perfect. Nobody's perfect, all right? If you sat in our house long enough, probably 2.5 minutes maybe, he'd probably be like, oh, that Neal guy, he's a little screwed up. And so he'd be like, you'd probably be true, right? I've got work to do. I've got stuff to grow in my own life, right? But there is a sense in which we as fathers, however perfectly, should be running hard and fast after Jesus. Do not abdicate the responsibility of your children's spiritual growth to your wife and act as if it's her responsibility. Because if she slaps you upside the head when you say that, she's right, you're wrong. I'm not advocating that she slaps you upside the head, all right? But that's more of a metaphor type of thing, right? As fathers, we need to run hard and fast after Jesus. That's part of training our children. There are plenty of examples in the Old Testament where people serve God well in front of their children, and then there are examples where they did not serve God well in front of their children. But this is really a foundational piece for us as fathers. Now, I just want to say to those of you this morning who, as you hear this as a father, you're feeling overwhelmed. And you're sad and you're frustrated and discouraged because you feel like you should be way farther ahead than you are. And so I just want to say to you that the last thing that the scriptures would encourage you to do is get discouraged at this moment. In fact, I would think the opposite. The scripture actually offers you hope. That if you feel like you're failing at this moment, the scriptures have given you a game plan for 6 months from now to look way different than where you are currently. So start now. Start now running hard and fast after Jesus the best way that you know how. And let God work on how that's going to play out in the family. And let God use that to transform your family. I would argue that probably some of you in the room here who I would look at and go, you guys are just crushing it as fathers, probably didn't start out that way. In fact, you would say that there was a moment, this was a come to Jesus moment for you, where you woke up and you said, I am not the father that I should be. And you said, Lord, help me change. And at that moment, the Lord started to do a work in your life. And we now look at you and go, you're like a freaking all-star. And as a result of that, God has been working in your family and in your home. So I would say there's tons of encouragement. You can focus on the now and also the future. You know, one of the things I love about running as a sport is that unless you're really an elite runner, you pretty much just run and measure yourself against yourself, right? That's pretty much what you do. So we use terms like PRs, which are like personal records, or PBs, personal bests, or whatever you want to call those things. But we recognize there are other runners out there, but really all we do is compare our times against ourselves. We focus on improving personally, and we kind of measure ourselves against ourselves. I think that's actually a really good way of setting up our example as a kids, for our example for our kids. You look around the room and you're like, oh man, there's some fathers that are just being great examples. Okay, good, exciting. That's outstanding for that family. But you should just compare yourself with you. Where are you now? And then you can look back when you go down the road 6 months from now and go, man, God has really done some great things in my life I would have never thought possible. So you focus on you and your ability to improve. Don't worry about where other people are in this process. You train your kids the best way you can. You set the example the best way you can. And you'll be able to look back and compare yourself with yourself. And that's a good way to kind of connect with this. Now, the second part of this is that Paul says that we are supposed to bring them up in the instruction of the Lord. Instruction is the counsel about avoidance or cessation of an improper course of conduct. That's maybe a long definition. Basically, instruction is intervening when our kids need course correction. And just so you know, your kids will need intervening at different times in their lives. Now, sometimes you're going to choose not to do that because you want them to learn a lesson, and that's good. That's understandable. But this idea that our culture has that somehow we just let our kids go and we never kind of confront them, we never kind of provide any accountability, I mean, that's just garbage. That's not helpful for your kids. It's not helpful for you. It's not helpful for your family. And we need to be men who are invested in our children. We need to be the individuals who are preparing our children for life. We need to be the individuals who are preparing them to love Jesus and run hard and fast after Jesus with their lives. And so we need to be in their lives, present with them, and willing to provide that instruction as needed. John Tyson says something that I think is super, super important as we think through fatherhood. He says, one day you may find that your greatness is not defined by your accomplishments in this world, but by your presence in the home. And we need to have our priorities in the right spot here. And we need to be the fathers that God is calling us to be. Don't look for someone else to be the catalyst in your family or in your church or in the community. You be that person. You are the one that God has put in that position to do so, and you are the one he has equipped to do so. Look, you're married to your wife. You are the father of your children, not someone else. You might be like, I don't know if I can really, I'm not really confident in my skills, and sometimes I feel like I'm in over my head. Okay, well, welcome to fatherhood. That's what it is. But God's put you in that place. And he has called you to that specific thing. We can do what God has called us to do. Our culture seems to think that fathers are incompetent. That is not the case. It is simply not the case. You are not incompetent. You are called by God in that role to do, and you are equipped by God to do what he has called you to do. Do not wait for someone else to be the catalyst in your family. You do it. And you can do it. Now, I told the first service, I love sports, okay? So just so you know, I love sports. I don't if you've talked to me any length of time, you know that. But maybe we've not had a chance to have a significant conversation yet. I love sports. And so Father's Day weekend is just, my goodness. Like I feel like I need to roll 3 TVs in all at once just to be able to watch everything that's going on today. So we've got golf, the last day of the final round of the U.S. Open. We've got the Euros, which is a soccer thing. Some of you despise that, but others of you can't get away from it. So I can't get away from it. My Phillies are playing really well. I love watching them. You may like the Reds. They're good and bad and good and bad. There's all these things that you're trying to do at once, right? And so you're thinking to yourself, okay, the message is over, and I got to go home, and I got to watch all these sports, and I encourage you to enjoy your day, right? By the way, as a tip with as a father, in a way that you can really invest in your kids, is try to get your kids into some of your hobbies that you really enjoy doing. Like, I think that's really good. You laugh at that like it's a bad thing, Genevieve. I love watching the Phillies with my oldest daughter. It's unbelievable. It's great. We cracked open some baseball cards last night together. Absolutely. So we just do what we can. And so we love doing those things. But here's what I would say. Maybe what you need to do today, if you haven't done so, is maybe you need to carve out a little bit of time away from sports, just a half hour, an hour. Get alone with your wife and develop a game plan for how you want to help raise your children well. If you don't have a game plan, if you don't have a situation, take some time away. Look, you can DVR the golf. Just go dark. Don't let anyone text you. Put your phone away so you can find out later who won, and spend a little bit of time just trying to develop a game plan for how you can be the father that God has called you to be, and partner with your wife in that process. Your family will be better for it. And I know I feel like I want to try and really, it's like a motivational speech this morning, but you can be a father that you never thought you could be because of what Jesus has done on the cross, dying in your place for your sins. He has given you the ability, he's given you the tools and resources to be able to be a father that you just didn't think was possible. So lean into that. Don't just go, oh, I'm just going to do, a decent job, but do the best job that you can, because God has given you the resources to be able to do that through his son, Jesus. Okay. Overall, I just want to kind of finish this way. If you're here this morning and you've listened to this and you've been tracking the whole time, you're like, yeah, man, I feel like somebody shared this with me early in life, and I've done my best to try to do this. I'm not perfect, but this is kind of how I've been kind of thinking through fatherhood. That's great. My encouragement to you is keep going. All right, we're just going to fan that flame, keep going, keep making it happen. Some of you are kind of like teetering. Well, I'm not sure if I'm this or I'm not. Usually, sometimes it's just a lack of confidence. God's probably using you in a more significant way than you might think. And so I encourage you just to keep going and be faithful. If you feel like you are a total failure as a father this morning, and there's reasonable proof of that, right? You're not just being irrational, but there's reasonable proof. You can change right here, right now, today. You can say, I'm going to run hard and fast after Jesus, and that because of what Jesus has done for me, I'm going to serve my family, I'm going to serve my wife, I'm going to serve my kids, and I'm going to bring them up to the best of my ability in the training and instruction of the Lord. And you can commit to the same thing that these families on the stage before you committed to this morning. And I guarantee you, God is going to do great things in your life. It may not be what you think, but he's going to do great things. And let me just say this too. Some of you here in the room are like, you know what? My kids are past 18 now, and I'm not sure what the relevance is to this message. They're grown. Adult kids need adult parents. All right? I still need my dad. Now, I don't need him in the same ways that I needed him before. And that conversation looks a lot different. I'm finding that now. I've got a 25-year-old daughter and a 20-year-old daughter. They need me in different ways now than they did when I was younger, but they still need me. And so this is important for everybody in the room. We all can be fathers that God has called us to be, and we can change if we need to change because of the hope of the gospel, because of what Jesus has done for us. We can be different, and we can look back 6 months from now and be super excited about what God has done in our lives. Listen, whether the culture says that we need fathers or not, we need fathers. We need you. You are awesome, and God can use you in a great way. And you can get to work this morning bringing in the training and instruction of the Lord to your family. And you'd be surprised with what God will do from this point forward. Don't give up. Make the changes and get at it. I want to show you a video as we finish this morning of a person named Daniel Bailey. Daniel's dad, Danny, great guy, passed away at a young age. the last couple of years, Daniel shares about just how God used Danny in his life. And I think it's a cool way to end this. And it shows us how much of a difference we can make as fathers in the lives of our kids.
My dad was like probably one of the most like caring people, and also like he like if he like knew you, he cared about you. So I always bring this up because like when I was playing basketball in high school or middle school or whatever, like he would like take off work and like hours before like he needed to, and probably his bosses got mad at him, but he would take off work to make sure he was there at our events, or if my mom had something going on, or if my sister had something going on, he was there. Me and my friends, and even like some of his friends as well, like have stories, like especially like when we're at the golf course playing golf or whatever, he would like be the one that would be like dancing on the green or like just cracking jokes or something. But yeah, he's the most caring and funny person I think I've ever met. So yeah, he's a great dude. Yeah, so I came to know Christ when I was in third grade, I believe. And so one thing that really like impacted me, so me and him every morning when I went to the bus, he would always give this symbol to me. And so this symbol was, remember who you are. So my name's Daniel Bailey. I live in Northern Kentucky. I'm the brother to Carmen. I'm the son to Sally. And remember whose you are. So I'm a child of God. I need to represent him in everything I do. And then remember that I love you. And so that's the part that really stuck with me, because he was always like, no matter what you do, no matter what life's challenges are, like, I will always love you. And so that kind of stuck with me. And then it really wasn't until actually like when he was in the hospital and he did pass away that I really was like, I need to like give my full life. Because growing up, I was like, I'm a Christian. I know that I believe in God, but I was like, do I really want to like give my life like to him or whatever? And so it was actually the impact he had after his death that really like stirred something in me. Because like if he lived like that after everything he went through, then why can't I do it after the little things I'm going through? So that's really like my testimony, like being saved at an early age, but not really giving my life to God fully until a little bit later. That first year, especially that Father's Day, the year after, it was just like me and my mom were contemplating even coming to church that Sunday. But I was like in the student ministry coming into church and sitting where he sat, like in our row. Like I had to hold back some tears as well, because I'm like this is not my seat. Like this is like where dad should be. It's not like the dark times where you like, I miss him. It's the happy times that can be the hardest too. And so like whenever like something big happens, like I just want to like call him or send him a text, because he like would always call, like he would call me a lot. It got to a point where it's like, come on, Dad, like got to do something. And so he would always call, always text, ask how like my day was or like how something went. And so like not being able to like call him when something good happens or like text him is something that's like, oh, I just want him to be here just for that. Just being loyal to like your wife and your kids as well, because like no matter what, because I know growing up I was like probably an annoying kid to him. It's like Daniel, just be quiet, like get in your room or something. But like no matter what, he would always have time for me, have time for my sister, have time for my mom. And like he valued that more than hanging out with his friends at like the country club or like just go hanging out doing whatever. Like he'd be like, no, I'm hanging out with my family now. Like this is my time to be with my son or my daughter. And just that time, just like knowing how important we were in his life, is just something that like I'm gonna like cherish forever, because we weren't just like, oh, they're my kids, they're with my wife. It's like, no, these are like my friends as well. Like I want to be with these people. And so that's my advice like to dads, because I'm not a dad yet, but like it's something I'm gonna take and something I can use from my dad, is that like you're never too cool, you're never like too important to like just be loyal and just be that person for your kids especially, and just always be there, because you never know when like something's gonna happen and you're not gonna be there anymore.